Welcome to DEF CON 3. I'm KT McFarland. An increase in hacking attacks has pushed military officials, and especially those training the officers of tomorrow, to adjust their strategies to combat an enemy that's often hard to find. The U.S. Air Force Academy is evolving its curriculum to focus on this cyber warfare threat. And joining me to discuss this is Lieutenant General Michelle Johnson. She is the superintendent of the U.S. Air Force Academy, and I think the first woman in that job. Is that right?
Yes, I am.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. You know, you can't pick up the paper now without seeing stories that the Chinese are hacking, the Iranians are hacking, all American companies have been hacked, the White House has even been hacked. Right. So, as a military officer, how do you look at the cyber threat?
Well, thanks for having me here, because this is obviously so trenchant a point. But actually, my first encounter of this specifically was when I was on the Joint Staff, and we talked about starting a cyber command, and I learned a little bit about what NSA does with the Department of Defense and with the private sector. Because this is really a holistic challenge. It's not one particular thing. And all the services are looking at this. And the modern profession of arms is going to depend on this linkage. We are joint, that means Army, Navy, Air Force all together all the time, international, coalition partners. And in this threat, the private sector. Because a lot of the really great ideas come from the private sector. And we're collaborating through research on our faculty with private sector to help our cadets be exposed to how things really work, and maybe even help develop technology for cyber hygiene, if you will, for cyber defense, cyber security, because you're right, we're all under assault every day, and in industry as well. And it's a great loss in the corporate sector as well as in the defense sector. And we really need to get our arms around this holistically. You
know, let's go a little bit further into this. You know, we think of military, and the military either has offensive or defensive weapons, and they're protecting the military. But you just mentioned that it's the private sector. It's the electric grid. It's the banking system. It's our whole civil society. So how do you see the military interacting with civilian society?
Well, we consult more and more, and you can see we don't have the lexicon sorted out yet. The Constitution is an 18th century document, and it tells about land and sea, but doesn't have air. Or
cyber.
Or cyber, a domain that really doesn't have a geographical boundary. So, and these are the careful boundaries that we have to sort through, because some of it's intelligence, some of it's business, and some of it's for communication. So what the Air Force is looking at is a task force to look across missions, to not just have a few experts in a room. It's got to be all of us aware, because frankly, sometimes the threat is somebody using the wrong security card or letting the wrong person in a room or kicking a cord out. I mean, some of it's physical. Or in warfare, maybe if you bombed a site, that would take the cyber offline too. There are many ways. It's not just the hacking. It's not just the firewalls. And so that's that holistic view. I think that the approach is in the DoD. I think the Army has gone to having a branch designated for cyber. The Navy may be going that way. The Air Force is looking into it with the task force. But back to our curriculum, we have changed. We've got a major in cyber and computer security, which is really.
So 5 years ago, you didn't have it. You couldn't major in cyber anything.
Computer science, or electrical engineering, but not in the cyber part. So. Again, we have research centers. We're collaborating with the Department of Homeland Security and some private sector companies so that the cadets learn, and again, not just the specialists, but everybody's conversant and can do summer research with the private sector to get. That's where a lot of the good ideas come. But the defense part is what we really need to focus on, because of what you said, we're under assault all the time.
You know, so how have you've just come back with a meeting with your heads of the other service academies. The Air Force Academy met with the West Point, met with Annapolis.
Exactly.
So how are you working together to figure out this whole new field?
Well, we compare best practices, and obviously we're friendly competitors on their friendly fields of strife, but it also makes you better. So we've just had an exercise where the cadets compete against each other, and we do that annually, but we also do it with colleges across the country and institutes to think about what the techniques are. We're having to up our game in terms of what we look like. You know, we have an airfield at the Academy for flying, because that's part of our mission. We actually fly a satellite with the support of Space Command, which is in Colorado Springs. But we would like to have more of a cyber sandbox, if you will, a place where people can experiment a little bit and see what might happen. One of the cool things I have on my wall is something that almost looks like a flower chart from Laugh-In from years ago. But what it really is a map of malware segments. It's cyber forensics to be able to determine what kind of malicious software is on a system. And I've got that hanging by my office to say this is sort of the modern profession of arms.
Well, you know, you're a pilot. That's your background before you went into this administrative role in the academic community. But as a pilot, you're used to flying planes. But we've seen since in Afghanistan and in Iraq that increasingly we're using airplanes that aren't piloted by pilots. We're using drones. How does that affect?
Well, it's not really one or the other. I think it's partnered because it truly is a part of this networked profession of arms that we have across services, across platforms. And so the signals going across someone's desk in South Dakota may bounce off a satellite, off of a remotely piloted aircraft, and then maybe onto a piloted aircraft and maybe a coalition one to support forces on the ground. So the links are really important. And so we have a program at the Academy, too, where the cadets work remotely piloted aircraft, but not just the platform itself, because it's not really unmanned. That's why we call it remotely piloted, because it takes 50 people upwards to really monitor and orbit from a UAV, because you need analysts, someone to drive it, but a bunch of other people to analyze the imagery. What is it? What are we looking for? If there are munitions, how does that work? So it's a pretty complex system. We're trying to expose to the cadets to how that really works. It's not like, in the movies where this vehicle just shows up and bombs go off. It's a very complex network that requires all the linkages to work, and that's where cyber comes in.
It is an honor to be with the first female superintendent of the United States Air Force Academy. And as we say at the McFarland House, beat Army.
I love it. I love it.
So, Lieutenant General Johnson, thanks for joining me. Check on foxnews.com for more about cyber threats. I'm KT McFarland, and thanks for watching.